Voice of Geekdom is now on Patreon. Please check out the link in the description to find out how you could gain access to premium content and social features. Hello Tolkien geeks and welcome back to Voice of Geekdom. I'm your host Dan, and today's guest is a good friend of mine, Mr. Timbo Took. Although today he's just Tim. His very first appearance on another channel. He's a pillar of the Tolkien YouTube community. Good friend of mine who I've known for a little while now, but this is the first time we're having a face-to-face conversation, so I'm excited about this. Your first time on another channel. And you are one of the most unique channels, I think, in our little community as well, because nobody quite does exactly what you do. You'll see behind him, you've got some lovely landscape paintings, which are all yours. And you have a channel dedicated to capturing the landscapes of Middle-earth in your guise as Timbo Took from the Shire.
I'm Timbo Took, and this is a joy of painting Middle-earth. A time when we come together to paint the most fantastic landscapes Middle-earth has to offer, and maybe we'll paint a scary one a time or two. That can be quite fun, you know. We're going to do a beacon right on this very top spot. Those guys are probably lightheaded. They probably get the dizzies you get when you go up real high in the mountains. Just pull them straight down. There we go. And just soften that up. That gives us a nice reflection. Well, if a reflection could be nice of that kind of destruction. I just mean in the painting sense, capturing it. Just coming through. Oh no, that never happened to Bob Ross the Blue. You probably saw it coming. You were probably saying, "Oh, Timbo, you're hitting that a little too hard." Oh, maybe that's what they were saying at the Green Dragon. This'll be a fun one if it actually turns out. All right.
Welcome to the show.
Thank you, Dan. Thank you for having me. I appreciate the invitation and being here. And I've had a lot of fun over this past year working alongside yourself and some of the other Tolkien YouTubers. And it's been a great community and a lot of fun.
Yeah, it's really good vibes. We all get on really, really well. People, sometimes ask, do you get on with the other channels? Yes, absolutely. And we all help each other, and it's a lovely bunch of people. Brought together largely by Yoyston from Men of the West. So massive shout out to him for bringing us all together like that.
Yeah.
Wonderful, wonderful young man. We're here today to talk about Hobbits. This will be the first of a new mini-series of podcasts on the channel where we're going to talk about various different Middle-earth races with various different creators across the fandom. So for those of you who are watching, if you have any ideas about people who might be interesting to have on, then leave some comments on that in the comments below. And also please do leave a like and so on, do the YouTube stuff for the algorithm and whatnot. But Tim, let's bring you into the discussion and talk about Hobbits. So you play a Hobbit on YouTube. You're in character all of the time. How did that come about? I mean, why did you make the decision creatively to do that?
Well, my YouTube channel kind of brought together a lot of my passions, my fandom for the Tolkien universe, and just playing dress up, being a character. And so when I thought about doing a YouTube channel, I obviously was, as I say, trained by the Blue Wizard, Bob Ross the Blue.
Maybe, yeah, right there. We'll have another little bump there. Just wherever you want them. And painting is very individual. Everybody will see nature through different eyes, and everybody has their own idea of what a mountain should look like or a tree. All we want to do here is show you how to make these effects. What you paint is totally up to you.
I used to watch Bob Ross as a kid all the time, and that's really where I learned how to paint, but I never started painting until much later down the road. I mean, I always drew and that sort of thing, but it wasn't until about 3 years ago, when I was tired of watching the Disney or Nickelodeon shows my kids were watching. I flipped on Netflix and there was Chill with Bob Ross. And so I was trying to explain to my kids who Bob Ross was. And I just sat there and went, wait a minute. I watched it all as a kid. We didn't have the money for oil paint, so I never got into oil painting. And then it wasn't until about 3 years ago I said, I'm not a kid anymore. I don't have to ask my mom for permission to buy the oil paints. So I asked my wife. And,
for permission.
Yes.
as you
she
do.
Said, yes, as you do. And she said, sure. And so I went out and I bought the paint set and just set to painting. And as soon as I did my first one, I thought, man, it'd be fun to paint some Middle Earth scenes. And then just kind of the wheels started turning. And that's kind of one of the things. I wasn't sure how well it'd translate, overseas. It was, something I watched growing up and never really thought about when I was starting a YouTube channel. Well, it might not translate. People may not get the connection and I'm not trying to, I didn't want to try and do an imitation of Bob Ross. So I didn't go out and get the Afro wig.
No.
But I thought if I was going to be painting Middle Earth, I should have to be a character from Middle Earth. And I think my stature, when you read a description of a Hobbit, generally being beardless, which I never could quite grow a proper beard, and being thick in belly, which I've got that down pretty good. So it made sense that if I was going to paint Middle Earth, I might as well paint it as a Hobbit. And then, so I was, Timbo is something I've been called for a long time, friends, even my wife call me Timbo. And it's a very, very Hobbitish name.
It is, yeah, it works. Yeah, definitely.
Yep. So the name Timbo Took kind of rolled off my tongue one day, and I thought, oh, there it is, Timbo Took.
And you've been successful. I mean, people are definitely responding to it. You've been growing the channel for some time. You're starting to do merchandise and so on. So it's growing really, really impressively, and it's something that I think people enjoy. It's something that I have on very often in the background when I'm doing some writing or something for my own channel.
Yeah, and I appreciate that. It's been a lot of fun. I had a chance to do MegaCon a few weeks ago and got to actually meet a number of people, and some of them who'd already been watching the channel. It's still relatively small, but I think last week I put out episode 70, so I've done 70 paintings, landscapes for Middle Earth. I did paint Shadowfax in one episode, so I did have a horse painting, which I had never done before. So it was kind of, I was like, if it turns out, I'll put it up. If it doesn't turn out, then nobody will ever know I even made the attempt.
But why a Hobbit specifically? I mean, obviously with your physique, but I mean, you love Hobbits as well. I think our first interaction was around Hobbit Day last year, which we're coming up to Hobbit Day again this year. And I did a video about the Took family, if I recall. And I remember you saying on the video that, you'd love the Took family, which who doesn't? I mean, you read the Hobbit as a kid, and you read about the Took family and how they go on adventures and so on, and you think, well, that's the family I want to be from.
Yeah. and that's when I came up with the character, it was, well, there's a chance to merge two families here. So Timbo Took, in doing kind of the family tree of it before I even started, it was, well, Peregrine Took had a son, Faramir the First, and I believe that's where the Tolkien, the writing stopped. It doesn't go beyond there.
I believe so,
as far as it goes. So if there was a Faramir Took the First, I thought that meant there had to be a Faramir Took the Second, and Faramir Took the Second would be in line to be a Thane of the Shire, and so he could have, like many royal families, you have the one who's in line for the throne or the thainship in the Shire, and then you could have his brother, who is a bit of going off on adventures and doing that sort of thing. So that's Timbo Took would be the younger brother of Faramir Took II, and Faramir Took I would be his father, who's married to Goldilocks, which is Samwise and Rosie's daughter. So
Right.
he's actually has his as Timbo Took says, his grand gaffer Gamgee and his grandpappy Took. So that was kind of the lore of my character, Timbo Took.
It's amazing that you made up your own headcanon for your character as well. So I want to ask, how old were you when you first read The Hobbit, and when did you get into The Hobbit?
Okay.
I imagine that was probably your first entry point into the Tolkien legendarium.
Well, actually, the animated.
Okay.
In the
Rankin Bass.
Yep, Rankin Bass.
Bilbo Baggins?
Yes.
We had a small theater when I was growing up. I grew up before the multiplexes, so this is back in the 70s. I was probably about 5 or 6, and they were playing the Rankin Bass Hobbit, in the theater as part of the program. So I went and saw that, and I think it was 2 or 3 years after it had originally come out. And so I saw The Hobbit there. That was my first experience with the Tolkien universe, and I loved it. But that was back in the day and age when you saw something once, and then it might be years before you see it again because it wasn't taped. You couldn't go online or anything like that.
No.
So I loved it and kind of been in the back of my mind. And then when I was probably about 10 or 11 or so, we were into these books, these choose your own adventure books.
Oh yeah, I know. I
Where you
used
make
to
a choice.
I used to play those as well. Yeah.
Yeah. So, and that led into Dungeons and Dragons. So I played that with my friends when I was in middle school. And then the term halfling came up, and I remember asking, well, what's a halfling? And somebody said, well, that's a hobbit. And I was like, oh yeah, I remember the Hobbits. I remember the movie and that, and learned it was a book. So, I was about 11 years old or so. I went and I got the Hobbit novel and read that for the first time. And that was the mid 80s, probably 1985 or so. And just it was one of the best books I'd ever read. It's fantastic. I didn't tackle the Lord of the Rings. I started it, tried it. I wasn't a great student. I was usually off having adventures of my own. So I read it. I read it when I was in high school. So I was probably about 15, 16 when I read The Lord of the Rings, and just blown away by it. And then I'd read it a couple times. The Hobbit kind of became a tradition of, in the fall, on a nice cold fall day, I dig back into The Hobbit. And so over the years, I'd read it a few times, and then the movies, they came out. I'm not too critical of, well, the book was this way and the movie was this way. I've always enjoyed, you kind of get somebody else's perspective, but the main thing is the main thing. It's, the book is still there and that. So, I just went into the movies and just to have fun and enjoy them and not with a real critical eye, but the music, Howard Shore's score for Lord of the Rings that's always been one of my favorite things for movies, is just the score. And I think of Star Wars without John Williams, would it have ever achieved what it had, just based purely on special effects and that sort of thing? And I don't think so. I think the music completely helped kind of launch that into the stratosphere. And
Absolutely.
Seeing the, the big cinematic wide shots Peter Jackson did, and the score that Howard Shore did. So it really, that really just brought it to life for me. And so when I went back and rereading it and then looking at comparing, I tried not to do too much of that as I watched the movie. I tried to just delve in, enjoy it, not watch with a critical eye. And then afterwards going, oh yeah, the Grey Company, where were they? That sort of thing.
I didn't engage my critical thinking skills until after I walked out of the theater. But I had to talk about it in depth with my dad when I came out after the movies. So I definitely was thinking about that stuff. But I was probably, certainly was quite a bit younger than you when I watched the movies. So it was a different time in my life. The Shire was wonderfully depicted in the movies. I think that was one element that they definitely absolutely nailed. I think.
Oh yeah.
That especially in the extended version where you get the concerning Hobbits prologue, which is a sort of a second prologue after the Galadriel section. You get the farm environment and the pastoral scenes of the Shire, and you get the kind of like the local hobbits and their customs, and there's so much sort of visual information in those scenes. I wish that scene had probably made it into the theatrical version, because I think that would have benefited the movies. But
and there is so much more to the Shire than the movies were actually able to capture. Even so,
that is true. Yes, I mean, we especially in the Lord of the Rings, we learn a lot about Shire culture. We're told about the political structure or relative lack of, because the hobbits exist in this kind of anarcho-syndicalist sort of society where there is a mayor who doesn't have any real power and doesn't have any real kind of responsibilities other than being the chairperson at banquets, we're told. Of course, food being central to Shire culture. They do have a kind of police force, but we're told that they basically are just there to maintain the order of the wildlife. So if there are beasts roaming around in the Shire, within the Shire borders, that's the purpose for their police force. There's very little crime in the Shire. There's almost no crime, I think, in the Shire, at least until Sharky's men show up. And
well, there was the theft of the spoons.
Yes, of course, that is probably that counts as a crime. Certainly a faux pas at the very least. I would say. I certainly think Bilbo would agree.
Yeah, absolutely.
So I've got a passage here that I want to read out. It's from the Concerning Hobbits prologue, or introduction to the Lord of the Rings, and it starts like this. It is plain indeed that in spite of later estrangement, hobbits are relatives of ours, far nearer to us than elves or even than dwarves. Of old they spoke the languages of men after their fashion, and liked and disliked much the same things as men did. But what exactly our relationship is can no longer be discovered. The beginning of hobbits lies far back in the elder days that are now lost and forgotten. Only the elves still preserve any records of that vanished time, and their traditions are concerned almost entirely with their own history, in which men appear seldom, and hobbits are not mentioned at all. Yet it is clear that hobbits had, in fact, lived quietly in Middle-earth for many long years before other folk became even aware of them. And the world, being after all full of strange creatures beyond count, these little people seemed of very little importance. But in the days of Bilbo and of Frodo his heir, they suddenly became, by no wish of their own, both important and renowned, and troubled the counsels of the wise and the great. I love the intro to the Lord of the Rings, the Concerning Hobbits intro.
I know.
There's the one line in there which it carries over to the films, doesn't it? The bit about where is it again? The world being full of strange creatures beyond count. Ian Holm has that same line in the films, although that's slightly different context.
Yeah.
The thing that I find interesting about that passage is the talk of the hobbits having a history that goes back to the Elder Days, which usually in a Lord of the Rings context, the Elder Days refers to, the First Age, which means potentially the hobbits were around back then, although there's no records of them. So yeah, the Lord of the Rings really fleshes that out, though. I do think that there are things there in the way that the Lord of the Rings portrays the Shire, where we are invited to be critical of Shire culture too. Frodo talks about how he kind of can't wait to leave the Shire, and he feels like the Shire could do with a bit of an invasion just to sort of stir things up, because he's almost embarrassed by how sort of simple and ignorant the hobbits are. And there is, there's characters like Ted Sandyman, who I think are characters that we're supposed to be critical of. So I don't think it's a perfect culture, but I do think it's a perfect society, if that makes sense.
Yeah. Well, and I know Tolkien wasn't, he wasn't about allegory, but in that sense, you certainly can understand just where Frodo's coming from, just kind of every young man's, longing to go out and seek adventure and it is in what he went through too with his own life and being sent off to World War I. That's, I had that same sense. I grew up in a farming community and just surrounded by cornfields. My first jobs were working on farms, baling hay and doing all those sorts of things. And all I wanted to do, there was less than 2,000 people in the town that I grew up in, and all I wanted to do was escape. And the first chance I had, I did. I joined the Navy and I went off and saw the world. And I completely understand where Frodo was coming from. But then I also understand, as soon as you get out and your own adventures run into a little bit of trouble, that you long for that time. And often when you do go home, things have changed. And I think that's what we see by the end of the book, with the scouring the Shire. When he goes back, then it's completely different. There's even a new mill that's there. So you can't help but I think the theme that's there is once you leave that innocence, that time, you can't really go back and shove it back in the bottle. When you go back to it, it's changed, but maybe because you've changed by it. So I always liked that the having those two perspectives in the book, from the time where you're there, and he does go deep into the Hobbit culture and all of that, and then when they come back to it, everything's changed.
In the course of broadening the understanding of the Shire culture in the first few chapters of The Lord of the Rings, we're also introduced to some spectacular minor characters amongst the Hobbit folk as well.
Oh, yeah.
People like Gaffer Gamgee, Farmer Maggot, Lobelia Sackville Baggins,
Fatty Bulger.
Yeah, Fatty Bulger, the missing member of the Fellowship, the fifth Hobbit member of the Fellowship in many ways, who stays home and bravely fends off the Nazgul as well, kind of.
Yes.
Well, he sort of runs away, but he bravely runs away.
Yeah.
A brave retreat.
And sounds the alarm. So
yeah, I mean, he does more than a lot of people would have managed there, actually.
Oh yeah. That was probably, as many things as that you could kind of attach to. Some people it's the Grey Company. Some people it's, they have different criticisms that they kind of attach themselves to. And, for me, it was really that Fatty Bulger was just completely missing, and there may have been a shot of him at the keg at Bilbo's party, but we're never introduced to him. And
so not Glorfindel or Fatty Bulger is your biggest criticism of the movie.
Yeah, sorry, Glorfindel. Yeah, he may have done a little bit more, but yeah. So it's one of those things, and again, I'm kind of partial to the Shire-folk.
Oh, we can tell. We know. Let's talk a little bit about us kind of Hobbit history a little bit as well, because there is quite a lot that we get in the appendices about the Hobbits. I know you're not a lore master, but bear with me here.
That's right. That's right. I know in our group sometimes there's some discussions that go on, and and I've read the Silmarillion and gone through, and but I'm not the scholar of the group, so I leave that to all you lore masters, and I just I'll go to the Green Dragon.
You're referring to our group chat that we have amongst the Tolkien YouTube community, and yes, I mean,
yes.
I don't generally get into these lengthy discussions as much either. I don't think. I mean, I could, but
and again, even your videos. I mean, I learn a lot from watching all your videos, and everything is kind of it pulls together. It's like, okay, well, things, it becomes clear for me. And that's, I enjoy watching your videos, and I think I watched the one with you and John. He has the film channel,
right? Yeah,
and
good friend. And
the kind of the critiquing of the movies versus the lore, and it's some of them, there's stuff that I didn't even think about, and all that. So. Yeah, those are, I always appreciate, and I'm always learning more and more, and getting inspired to paint as we go.
So let's get into Hobbit history a little bit, because the Hobbits, many people may not appreciate this, but the Hobbits were subjects of the Northern Kingdom, so they were part of the Kingdom of Arnor, and that happened when they crossed the Brandywine, the Barandwin. Or Barandwin, I think, in Elvish, the Brandywine, and they sought permission from King Argaleb II, which was the 10th king of Arthedain. So this was during the period where the Kingdom of Arnor was at war with the Kingdom of Angmar, as in which king of. So this was during that period. It was around 1601 when they were granted permission to settle the lands of the Shire up there in Arthedain, and in return they promised to maintain the bridges and roads of the area there in the Shire. So they were subjects of the Northern Kingdom, which they remember that up until the start of the War of the Ring. We're told at the beginning of the Lord of the Rings that they still refer to the days of the king, and that their laws and customs are derived from the king. From the Kingdom of Arnor, the king's laws, essentially. Yes. So that left a lasting impression on their whole society, even in the days when the kings were long gone and they were in exile. Which is, of course, important to the plot of The Lord of the Rings, because it leads us towards the hobbits meeting Aragorn, who they have no idea who he is, but when they discover who he is, they are naturally drawn to him, and they recognize his authority.
And they know that history, so it's not completely lost to them when they learn he's of the Dunedain. So that's.
I think that means more to Frodo than it does to the others, because he actually really does understand it. But it's ingrained in their culture in a way that they understand that. But sorry, I interrupted you. Go on.
No, I was just saying. So if there wasn't that understanding there, if they didn't, and granted, there's Frodo obviously knew much more because of his time with Bilbo in that, but that. There wouldn't have been that trust, that connection. And as far as the story goes, it's like, where would have gone from there if they hadn't trusted him if they had tried to go their own way. It just wouldn't have worked out without Aragorn.
And then, so later on, we're told that the hobbits believed that they sent a company of archers in order to go and do battle with the kingdom of Angmar to support the king. So not only were they subjects of the kingdom of Arnor, but they, and there's no record of this anywhere in the histories of men. Nowhere else is this said to be, but I'm inclined to believe the Hobbit version of this story, that they did send the kingdom of archers, a company of archers, to the wars, which is really, really fascinating.
It is, and that's one thing you don't picture a hobbit wielding a bow.
No,
so it is. It's one of those little nuggets from their history that just makes the hobbits even more. There's a little bit more than how's he say it? There's more to this hobbit than meets the eye. Is that the line? But even the whole culture, there's more to the hobbits than.
Yes, definitely to the culture. Gandalf says it when the party reach Rivendell in The Lord of the Rings, in the first chapter of Book 2. And Gandalf says there's a strength in the Shire, a strength of a different kind. And he's talking about the power to resist the despair that the Black Riders, for instance, would bring to their enemies. So they have, obviously, the Black Riders have this power to inflict despair and corrupt and project their sort of evil spiritual selves onto their enemies. And the hobbits seem natural at resisting that, and Gandalf recognizes that.
Yeah,
and we see that in the scene that you already referenced with Fatty Bolger when they raise the alarms, because they actually basically drive the Black Riders off by doing that.
Yeah, and that also you see that everybody kind of underestimates the hobbits. But Gandalf doesn't, and there's he has his reasons, and he remembers, and he knows the strength of them. So they're stouter stuff they're made of.
Gandalf first realizes this, going back to the histories again, during the Great Plague in the Third Age, which was a big event which affected a lot of the map. It was important in the history of Rohan as well, because that was during the same period that we will see actually in this upcoming anime. But up in the north, Gandalf was up there in the Shire at that point, and this was when he first met the Tooks and first met the Hobbits, and he was impressed by not just their bravery in the face of adversity, but in their compassion and pity for one another, and their ability to just pull together and their sort of strength as a culture. I think the Hobbits are also Tolkien's kind of nod to English culture in some ways as well, because I think they're based on 19th century England, where the period in which he grew up. There's a kind of a class divide that we observe in the books, which is absent in the films. I was talking about this yesterday on another podcast. There's certainly a class element to the main characters, with Samwise being Frodo's servant, and the other two being kind of like nobility or royalty almost. Particularly in Pippin's case, with the Tooks being the inheritors of the office of the Thainship, which is kind of the leader of the Shire in a sense. Yeah. Any thoughts on kind of the political structure of the Shire, that kind of thing?
Well, I'm not as much. I wouldn't question it as much as George R.R. Martin wanting to know what King Elisar's tax structure was. But I mean, I think the Hobbit culture doesn't transcend basic, basic cultural rhythms, or I would say basic human rhythms, but with hobbits, it's the same thing. There's always going to be, even in a culture where they do value food and merriment and drink more, there's always going to be those who seek power, who seek authority, and there's always going to be those who have to resist that. And having kind of that class structure, you don't find that different in really any other societies. There's always going to be, oh, and you have a beer. I don't have a beer with you.
I do.
So it's still early in the day for me.
We're several hours apart, so it's evening for me. And I do like to drink while I'm talking to people about Lord of the Rings.
Yes.
Usually I'm wine, but
yeah. Well, I'm not usually very picky, so. Yeah.
Timbo was telling me that last weekend he was wrestling alligators.
I was hunting pythons, but unfortunately my wife was at home praying that I wouldn't see any, and I didn't see any. But no, she was praying for my safety, and so by way of keeping me safe, we didn't see any pythons, but we saw plenty of alligators down in the Florida Everglades. They have a python problem down there where Burmese pythons have taken over, so they're kind of ruining the ecosystem down there. They're wiping out the rabbits and the possum and the raccoons and everything else. So, in Florida, it's a little bit of sport to go out and you catch some pythons. Just sneak up and grab them by the back of the head. So,
probably a little bit like a bounder from the Shire. Patrolling the wilderness around the Shire. Probably not any pythons in Eriador, but certainly no alligators. You would think.
Yeah, but there are wolves, and wolves.
Yes,
wolves, especially in packs, are very dangerous. But yeah, alligators. Alligators generally, I do a lot of paddleboarding in Florida, and it's an inflatable paddleboard. Too, so that adds another element to it of being wary of the gators. But they usually leave you alone, and I usually make sure to go paddleboarding with somebody who's smaller than me, because that makes them more of a target to the gators than me.
Okay, interesting. One of the other interesting things about Hobbits, I think, is not just their connection to England, but also their 19th century England, but also I think the Anglo-Saxon element. And we see this in the Lord of the Rings books when Merry meets the King of Rohan, when he talks with Theoden and starts to realize that actually the Hobbits have quite a lot in common culturally with the Rohirrim, who of course are Anglo-Saxon, analogues in many respects, and speak Anglo-Saxon. At least their speech is rendered as Anglo-Saxon. And Merry realizes that they have many of the same words. The Rohirrim refer to the hobbits as Holbeatla, which is almost very similar to the word hobbit. So there's a linguistic connection, which you'd expect in a Tolkien book, but it's because they come from the same place. The Rohirrim come from the north, from Rhovanion, and so do the hobbits. So we know that from Gollum's backstory, that they came from the Vales of the Anduin. So I think that's a really interesting connection as well, the Anglo-Saxon element, because the story that I told about the hobbits settling the Shire for the first time, crossing the Brandywine, they were led by two hobbits called Marco and Blanco. And many people say that these two hobbits were inspired by the stories of Hengist and Horsa, who were the kings who led the Angles and the Saxons to their invasion of Britain in the 5th century. So going back to the histories there, you've got that connection to England, which was obviously really important to Tolkien.
Yeah.
Do you think it's an Anglophile thing as well, where people like the Hobbits because it's the connection to England? Is that something you've thought about?
I, being American, I didn't. You know, and I kind of put it in the allegory of World War II, just trying to figure out who matched with which characters and that sort of thing. So now my family is all from Ireland. My probably 7/8 of my grandparents or great grandparents came from Ireland back in the 1800s.
Before I knew that you were from the States, I thought that you were Irish from the Timbo Took accent, actually.
Yeah, well, the accent kind of it kind of floats somewhat.
Yeah,
and
I thought that's a strange Irish accent, and and then I kind of cottoned on that it was an accent that you were doing, or a voice that you were doing, of course. But
yeah, and it depends on. I think it depends on how frustrated I get painting is how much the accent. So as a painting starts to get muddy or frustrate me, one, I get a little more quiet, and two, I may lose the Timbo character a little bit in that accent. So I always say it's a Shirish accent, because it doesn't really have any strong roots anywhere. And so for me, having my family roots being from Ireland, when I watched, I always thought of the Hobbits as being Irish, and then as I got older and I was reading more about Tolkien and his childhood and that, and then I kind of equated it just with his childhood more, so that English countryside, that sort of thing. And I think of the when were the Olympics in the UK? 2012.
I think so. Yeah.
Yeah.
Because I was at university at the time here in London. So
okay, yeah. Right. So the opening ceremony was that transition from English being an agricultural. I'm just remembering Mr. Bean from the opening ceremony. That's the only thing I remember, really. Oh, I love Mr. Bean. Well, I think they had the Queen parachuting, skydiving with James Bond. And
was there any Middle Earth in the opening ceremony? Because there probably should have been.
Well, it was the big set pieces were celebrating the agricultural community of the UK, and then the transition in the late 1900s, early or not 1900, late 1800s, early 1900s, when they transitioned
industrial revolution sometimes.
Yeah. So they transitioned from the agricultural to the industry, and it showed, so that it looked very much like a Shire thing there. So like I said, as I grew up and I pictured the Hobbits and that sort of thing, I always thought of the Shire kind of as that protected Ireland that wasn't really drawn in to the wars so much, and that's the UK I thought of as the men of the West,
the Bree folk, sort of, maybe.
Yeah. And so, but then as far as the Anglo-Saxon line of it, or the influence there, it wasn't until later in life I had read Beowulf, and then there's an author, he's written a number of books, The Last Kingdom, books that I've read, and a lot of them do with, well, I think the Last Kingdom series deals with King Alfred and his rise and bringing the UK together. So those books always kind of interested me because knowing that the time period was a time period that Tolkien was very interested in. And then so by way of reading those, it kind of brought to me the influence that the professor was looking at as he was writing that period in history, and which is really fascinating from the time the Romans left Britannia, and thinking of 100 years later, when people are still looking at the cities and the walls and the aqueducts and the things that the Romans had built, and now they're thrust back into this very agricultural, non-industrial time, and just
almost like the societies of men and the societies of Hobbit being built on top of the bones of the Númenórean kingdoms in exile, really, and it's the same thing.
Yeah,
and this is my upbringing as well. I mean, I grew up in East Anglia, so I grew up just up the road from Colchester, which is England's oldest town, which is a Roman town, and so my town was built on top of a crossroads between two Roman roads, and there was a traveller's inn there built on that crossroads, which is still there, which is hundreds and hundreds of years old. So, when I read about the Shire and read that stuff, it really, really resonates because it's literally my life.
Oh yeah,
There are alleyways in my hometown that date to the 11th century and stuff. It's ridiculous.
And to me, the oldest building where I grew up was maybe 100 years old. We would still find an arrowhead from time to time, because hundreds of years before it had been all Native American land. So when we'd dig up in the fields every now and then and come across an arrowhead. So there was no history per se, no written history of what had happened there. So, and that's what has always fascinated me. And the other writer, his name came to mind, Bernard Cornwell, who's written a series of books, and it's that time period, and it's when you have those Saxon invasions and all of that. So, looking at that, and then looking at Middle Earth and Tolkien's writings, and seeing the groups of people from the Rohirrim and the Gondorians and just kind of their common cause, but still having that that bickering amongst each other, and as I always like to just think of the Hobbits, just more concerned with food and tobacco and that sort of thing.
That's something we haven't mentioned, is that the Hobbits are credited with having invented the practice of smoking tobacco through a pipe, which I don't think I've ever seen any. I've never seen any moving footage of Tolkien where he's not smoking, really. I have actually. Now I think about it, I've seen footage where he's writing. But he well known to be an avid smoker. Obviously an important pastime for him. I'm not an advocate of smoking. I'm actually trying to give up at myself at the moment. But it's interesting cultural staple of the Shire, which seems to have carried over to other cultures, as it would, because nicotine is addictive. But
yes it would. But the other thing with the pipe smoking is, and I remember reading a study from, when they're doing all the studies on smoking and all this, but they had found the guys who smoked pipes generally had a lower stress level, which the reduction of stress in their life had also, prolonged it. So, not to advocate going out and starting smoking, but the simple act of the almost a meditation that it provides, and that's part of the Hobbit culture, is just that slower pace, that relaxing, because as many dangers as there are in the world, one of the biggest killers is stress. And that's the other thing with reading the books, and for me, for painting, it's about relieving the stress from the world of, just everything's competitive, everything's running, everything's always in motion. And that sort of thing. But that's very much part of the Hobbit culture as well, is with that. And then you can go into was Saruman running the tobacco fields? He had all the South Farthing.
He had the old Toby in his stores.
Old Toby, yeah.
We're told elsewhere. It's not mentioned specifically in the Lord of the Rings, but I think it's in Unfinished Tales or somewhere else potentially. We're told that Saruman took up the practice of smoking because he wanted to understand Gandalf better. He wanted to emulate Gandalf, and he was jealous of Gandalf. He would make fun of Gandalf publicly for doing so, but then privately he was also indulging. Interesting wrinkle on Saruman's character, which occurred to Tolkien later on, when he went back and revisited some of these things and fleshed them out. And
that's that's kind of the fun of Tolkien too, because it was a world that was always expanding, and there was always going into, he had some motivations, I think, almost undiscovered motivations that he had for characters as he fleshed them out. And that's what we get in the later writings, is he sits down and has a chance to do that. So that's always fun to look back into. And that, I'd come on that, and somebody did a video on his connection with the Shire, Saruman's connection with the Shire, but basically through the pipeweed that they were growing and he was dealing in, and that's why it was there in Isengard.
Yeah, and that was when he started placing spies in the Shire as well. And it was almost it became his exit strategy when he lost the war. I'm going to go and take over the Shire in my last moment of spite.
And that's just always, to me, it was like such a. It's, and of course, American politics are kind of been pretty wacky these days. But when you see somebody who was very prominent long ago, and then it's 20 years later, and the glory is gone, but they're still trying to have some relevance in there, and that so it's very.
Is this a George W. Bush thing? Because he was on TV yesterday.
No, but I did see a cameo ad for Rudy Giuliani, who was America's mayor on 9/11, and then I saw a cameo the other night, and that's kind of what I was thinking. Somebody who is very. We're
filming this the day after the 20th anniversary of 9/11, so that's why this is fresh in both our minds, I think.
Yes, absolutely. But yeah, just to see, Saruman is the equivalent of doing cameos. So to hold on to keep his operation going, if it were today.
The Scouring of the Shire is a very interesting way to end a book, isn't it?
Yes.
What did you make of it the first time you read The Scouring of the Shire?
Well, of course, it's always sad to see that what happened to the Shire in their absence. But then you could go back and say, well, would they have, if our four hobbits had been there, would they have had the courage to stand up in the situation without having gone through everything they did on their own adventure? And it's it's almost like they came back. Had they stayed there, then the Shire could have been lost and lost to,
Gandalf
forever
even says
history.
it. Gandalf even says it as well, doesn't he? This is what all your training has been for. You don't need me anymore.
Yeah, yeah. And so they're able to come back and with their training, their adventures, and then they can hold that up. But again, too, that's I take it back to kind of Tolkien's his life and going off to war and then coming back and what he could handle in his life going forward from there. And I think that's, you see that a lot when people go out on their own for their first time and they have their adventures or misadventures and they learn. And then, that's that path, that journey to adulthood. So, it's
certainly a coming of age arc for Merry and Pippin, isn't it? And it's the culmination of that for them. They also go on to become scholars within the Shire as well. We're told at the beginning that the Shire don't really care about history so much, apart from they're very obsessed with their genealogical history. And the Concerning Hobbits intro tells us that they will go into great detail and bore you to tears with their knowledge of their genealogies. But in general, they don't keep detailed histories of events and so on. And so obviously we get the histories, but we get them from an Elvish or a Gondorian perspective. But going forward after the Third Age, going into the Fourth, Merry and Pippin become writers and scholars in their own right. And Pippin is the reason why we have the Red Book of Westmarch, and why there was a copy that ends up in Gondor and gets completed by Findergild, the king's writer, which just again shows how much they've grown, I think.
Yeah, it really does. And I had a little fun with one of my paintings a couple weeks ago. I did the Shire-folk. It was statues like the Argonath, but in the Shire, and it was of Merry and Pippin, and because of their importance as historical figures in the Shire. So, that one was most of the time I do. Obviously, I pick a scene from the books and I paint that, and that was probably one of the first ones I've indulged in. Going forward, imagining, somewhere along the lines of maybe 98 year 98 of the Fourth Age, that sort of thing. But they become those important figures and then get laid to rest beside King Elisar. And so I think their story is one, when you kind of insert yourself into different stories. And with a book like Lord of the Rings, you can insert yourself into any number of the characters, as you do when you read. You kind of picture yourself in there, and those are two characters.
It's a story with multiple protagonists, isn't it? Yeah, definitely.
Absolutely. And there's something to be said for each one. So there, you have Aragorn, who's becoming the leader, becoming King Elisar, and everything he needs to do to get there. And then you have Pippin, who eventually will lead the Shire, and again he's going through his transformation as well. So they all have, and of course Samwise and Frodo. So there's a protagonist that everybody can kind of attach themselves to.
But one other thing I think about when I think about hobbits as well is this aspect of how they have an ability to stay hidden, and how that they're described as being almost appearing to be magical in their ability to disappear, which many people I think about the fact that the One Ring literally makes Bilbo and Frodo disappear, literally. That is an extension of their ability to be stealthy. which I'm not sure whether that's true. I think maybe the One Ring does what it does because that's the way it works on mortals. But putting that aside, I mean, I really like that aspect of the Hobbits, and it's kind of it almost feels as if the Hobbits were designed for the role that they play in the War of the Ring, because they go unnoticed and they go kind of underestimated, and they're built for stealth as well. And this is a mission of stealth where they're given the task of sneaking into Mordor. You wonder whether Eru Ilúvatar, the god of Tolkien's mythology, put hobbits there for that reason.
Yeah, and that's the thing for anybody else besides two hobbits traveling through Mordor, would have been discovered. And I love the narrator's voice in the Hobbit book, where it almost implies that hobbits are still around, that we just don't see them anymore.
That's right. Yeah.
And as as reading that as a kid, essentially, that was always fun for me to think, because I spent a lot of time. We had 1,000 acres or so of woods and river and that behind my house, and so I spent my summers literally just down and adventuring in the woods and climbing trees and doing all this. And the thought that maybe there's still some hobbits,
some burrowed hobbits in the woods outside your house.
Yeah,
I think I thought the same thing as well growing up in a village in East Anglia.
Because it was very much like where I grew up. It was fields and trees and and a thick wood here or there. But, it was very much, it could have been the Shire, where I was. And so that was always a fun thought. But, were hobbits created for that reason, to complete the task? And I think, I definitely think Tolkien probably would think so. And even just the relationship between Frodo and Gollum, that wasn't necessarily accidental. So, but for such a small people, they play such an important part.
Even the smallest person can change the course of history. Yeah. I think that's a really good note to end on. So I think we'll leave it there. Thanks very much for coming on, Timbo. It's been really fun. I want to ask, where can people find you, and what have you got coming up on your channel?
All right. Well, people can find me at Timbo Took on YouTube, and you can find me Timbo Took on Instagram or Twitter or anywhere else. But yeah, just as the channel continues to grow, I'll expand more of the paintings that I'm doing, and I've tried to experiment a little, and we may even throw in some crafts and some whittling and things like that into the channel. So I've been wanting to ask, actually, if you sort of work in any other mediums and things like that.
Whether you would consider that, because that would be interesting.
Yeah, mainly just some hobby stuff, but I do a little bit of whittling from time to time. There we go.
Oh, nice. Looks like a dwarf.
Yeah, a dwarf or a wizard. I don't know. It's somebody with a hat and a beard. But I'll whittle from time to time, that sort of thing. But
I'm in an art studio here myself. You might be able to see behind me. There's actually, I'm going to wiggle the camera around. You can see over there, there's some of my housemates sculpting. My housemate is a sculptress, and she works actually in the movies and in the TV industry doing prosthetics. So she works on, I think, The Rise of Skywalker. the Star Wars
okay.
movie,
Yeah.
last year, or in the last years, when that was in production. So very talented girl.
Oh yeah, yeah. No, and that's I kind of think of myself as a jack of all trades, a master of none. Obviously, I don't think my paintings are they're more meant for hobbit holes rather than galleries or great halls.
But you do sell a few, though. I think Yoyston from Men of the West bought one, didn't he?
Yeah, and
For his dad, if I remember correctly.
yes, yeah. So I have some prints. I haven't got the paintings, the oil paints. They take a long time to cure, and I've just kind of been doing this as a hobby, so I haven't really set up anything to sell, and but I do have some prints that are available now. Those are at timbotook.com. That'll take you to the store. But yeah, so I work in oils. I've dabbled in acrylics a little bit of carving. I do some writing again, but I'm not writing the great American novel. Just a hobby myself, but yeah, oils has been a discovery for the past few years for me, and the show is really me kind of learning as I go, but kind of showing people that they can, you can try it too, and it's a lot of fun, and if you paint along, that's how the show is done. It's done as a tutorial, kind of the way Bob Ross did with his, but you can take these paints and put them on the canvas, and in under an hour you can have a landscape from Middle Earth.
So I'll have all of Timbo's links in the description below. Please do check out his channel. One of the nicest people I've met in the Tolkien fandom, and as I said earlier, absolutely a staple of our community. Thank you so much for coming on. This is really good fun.
All right, thank you, Dan. I appreciate you inviting me along.
And we'll see you next time.
Hey Tolkien geeks, thanks so much for making it to the end of the video. I hope you all enjoyed getting to know Timbo as much as I did. Please don't forget to leave a like and a comment below to help me reach more viewers. As I mentioned at the beginning of the video, this is the first in a short mini-series of podcasts I have in store over the next several weeks. So I thought I'd leave you with a taste of what's to come in our next instalment in 2 weeks' time.
It smells like elves, thought Bilbo. And he looked up at the stars. They were burning bright and blue. I'm joined today by my good friend Helen, aka the Clueless Fangirl, and we have a new debutante to the channel today. It's Lexi from Girl Next Gondor, and you two have spent a lot of time talking about elves together. I haven't watched all of the content that you've done together, but you guys are a match made in heaven when it comes to this subject. So I'm particularly excited for this one.
So this is loops all the way around to my ultimate conclusion, which is that first age elves are the best, and the Sons of Feanor are the most novel and novelty-seeking of all elves ever, and are superior, and we should just all give them our allegiance.
But for me, I always say, I grew up on fairy tales. My mother read, Grimm's fairy tales. So I grew up with the knowledge of fairy, right? This is what Tolkien, and I really love that he invented a new form of fairy.
Who is to blame for the long-standing beef between the elves and the dwarves, and why is it the dwarves?